Welcome to Nonprofit Thrive, a podcast where we learn from the humans who are helping nonprofits succeed in the digital world. Now, let's get started with the show.
Okay, welcome. I'm Ben Freda, host of the show, where we share the stories of leaders in the nonprofit space, the people behind the organizations, foundations, and companies that help nonprofits change the world. So we've had a couple of episodes so far. This is episode 4. Past guests include, we had Ryan Osmick on, who is CEO of Soapbox Engage. So listen to that one if you are curious about what a CRM is and why you should be using it and how to start. Another fascinating guest, Emily Culbertson, we had on. She is a specialist in putting out fires that occur in website projects, which is something everyone needs to know about. Fascinating to talk to her. This podcast, before we get into today's guest, who is going to be equally fascinating, if not more, I need to read the sponsor message, which is the following. The podcast is brought to you by the kind folks at BFC Digital, which, surprise, surprise, is my company. At BFC Digital, we help nonprofits thrive on the web. If you are working at a nonprofit in the communications department or in communications in general, I'm sure you know how important it is to have a website that looks and works and helps you further your mission. Also, sure, you're familiar with how crappy websites can be and difficult and buggy and weird and hard to break into and hard to fix. BFC Digital, our job is to make that easy. So we can do everything from fixing bugs, doing maintenance, doing really simple stuff, all the way to strategizing, designing, building brand new big websites or web apps. And we'll do it, while being friendly and without tossing a bunch of jargon at you. Go to bfcdigital.com to find out more. Okay, so today on the podcast, we're talking to Elise Newman, who I personally got to know through a project we did together over the summer and the fall for her nonprofit, Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. I've got to know her and her team. They're excellent people. They have a really unique set of programs there that I thought would be great for people to learn more about. But I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. Elise is the executive director at Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. Before she was in Oregon, she graduated from Cornell University with a degree in biology and society. She's focused on environmental conservation and wildlife management since then. After college, she spent 10 years working in wildlife management and zoo conservation, managing endangered species, hosting conservation events, raising money for raptors in Vermont and for red pandas in New York, and for tigers and elephants in San Diego. And she is now thrilled to be working to protect estuaries and marine environments with Oregon Shores. So Elise, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So obviously, first question, protecting raptors in Vermont, you mean velociraptors, right? Like dinosaurs?
I wish. Raptors meaning birds of prey. So eagles and hawks, things like that.
Got you. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot more sense, I suppose. You know, I have an 8-year-old. This is totally off topic. I have an 8-year-old who, maybe I told you this, he was fascinated with dinosaurs for years and years and years, and somehow became into football this year for some reason, and only likes the teams that are bird teams because he birds evolved from dinosaurs. So when he was picking his favorite teams, he's like, what are the dinosaur teams? Anyway,
that's great.
There's a Toronto Raptors, I think.
I'm not familiar with football teams, but good for him. I like that he's combining his two interests now.
Totally. So before this becomes a podcast about my kid, how about can you start? It sounds like you have been involved in conservation work since like the beginning, like at least from college. Is that something you always knew you wanted to do, or is it something that came out of a college experience, or what's the history?
That's a great question. I went to college thinking that I was going to have one of two different career paths. I was either going to major in literature and study books, or I was going to become a veterinarian. And clearly neither of those things happened. I loved animals ever since I was a kid. My parents are very conservation minded, so I grew up being outdoors and being around animals all the time. but then I started working in a vet hospital as an assistant.
Mm.
And I realized that I liked my job better than the vet's jobs.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the name of your major again? It was like
It was biology and society. So it was,
so what does that mean?
Yeah, it's how biology is applied to society. So at my college, a strict biology major was what you would choose if you were going into the medical field or into research or something like that. So, cells and organisms and things like that. Biology and society was looking at how biological sciences like evolution and anthropology could be applied to society today. So that's where the environmental conservation lens came about. So I fell in love with conservation sort of through that major and through my study abroad program.
And what was your study abroad program?
I spent a semester camping in Kenya and Tanzania.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah. Camping like for like 6 months or 4 months or whatever?
Yeah, for 4 months. It was really fun and not glamorous at all.
Yeah, I don't know if glamour is the word that comes to mind when I think about that, but what an experience. So where were you?
I was in Serengeti National Park and outside of Tsavo National Park and Amboseli. Moved around quite a bit. And I wasn't by myself. I was with a whole group of instructors and other students as well. But
it was like a conservation. And what did you were you some sort of conservation related thing, or were you counting wildlife or reporting on wildlife or something like that?
All of the above. So I ended up turning my study abroad research into my college thesis. And my research was about the biodiversity of wildlife in these corridors between national parks. So there's these discrete national parks in Africa, just like there are in the United States. And wildlife doesn't know that there's a boundary to the national park, right? So they don't realize that they're protected here and not protected 50 yards to the left.
Gotcha.
So the local communities were trying to create these protected corridors between national parks to help the wildlife as they migrate and move for feeding and resources. And it would help benefit the local communities because if people were coming to see wildlife, if all of these tourists were coming, the communities could benefit from some of that ecotourism money. So my research was to see if the places where the communities had set up the corridors was actually where the wildlife was moving. It wasn't going to be useful if the wildlife was using a path completely separate from where the communities had set up these protected corridors.
Sure. And what did you find out? Where they...
Most of them were in the right places. A couple of them needed to be moved. But for the most part, the communities moved their wildlife really well.
Yeah, great. Okay, that I can see how that is like an awesome experience for somebody young who's like getting into this world and sees like, oh my gosh, this actually can work. So you're from Cali originally?
Yeah. So I went full circle back to California to go to the warmest zoo I could find.
Yeah, good for you, man.
Yeah, so I was at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park for about 8 years. And while I was there, I worked with Sumatran tigers and African elephants.
And for this, are you like doing like work with the animals themselves, or are you now focused more on like fundraising and awareness and things like that?
At the San Diego Zoo, it was all of the above. So I was with the animals and caring for the animals every single day. But as part of my position, I was also showing donors around the zoo and doing educational presentations for the animals, appearing at special events to educate people about the animals or give them some sort of basically like extra experience that they might have paid for a private event. So I was with the animals every day, but I was getting to interact more and more with people and interact on the fundraising side and also take a stab at management as well. I had a large team and I had the opportunity to lead the team. So that was a really great experience for me.
Cool. So I think a lot of people, obviously nonprofit world, are interested in how fundraising works, how, what works and what doesn't. Did you have any, and I'm just asking that, and if not, that's fine, but I'm just asking this because I'm sure people are going to ask, like how did you get people to give, or, give funds to conservation, what does emailing work? Does like targeting individual private big donors work? Like what worked? What didn't? Do you have any stories that were terrible initiatives that went nowhere, or great initiatives that were awesome,
Yeah,
for lack
that's a
of a
great
better word,
question.
or awesome?
So the San Diego Zoo was a bit of a special case, which I'm still, now that I'm in Oregon, learning the difference between the zoo world and the nonprofit conservation world. The zoo was still a nonprofit, but the benefit of the zoo was that we could target individual major donors, bring them to the zoo, show them their favorite animal, give them a really cool experience with this animal, and show them, like, if you donate, your name will go on this building, or your name will go on this program. In the conservation world in Oregon, we don't have buildings or a whole collection of animals that I can bring people to see. We have the Oregon coastline, but it's much harder to show people, if you donate, your name will go here.
Of course. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So in the zoo world, that worked great. People like putting their names on stuff, is what I learned.
Who knew? Who knew?
Yeah.
People love putting their names on stuff.
Yeah. So we had
funny.
lots of buildings. Every room of every building was named after somebody, some donor. Another really common donation incentive was naming animals after donors.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So instead of having a tiger with a Sumatran sounding name from Indonesia, we had a tiger named Majel, who was named after Majel Roddenberry, the wife of the Star Trek creator, because they were donors.
Wow, right, exactly. Which is weird, but is also a great way of obtaining funds to do some really great stuff. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So it worked great. The development department at the San Diego Zoo was brilliant for thinking of that. It just made us all feel a little bit silly when you were standing outside of the lion exhibit calling Miss Ellen and Ernest to come in for their meal at the end of the day. Miss Ellen the lion is not as regal of a name as you would hope, but it still works to bring in funds to the zoo.
Totally. So when you moved to Oregon Shores, right? So you don't have those sort of big buildings, you don't have the names, the animals, you don't have like an experience to show people, I guess. Although we could definitely get into Coast Watch, which is like kind of an amazing experience you guys have. But yeah, what do you do instead, I guess?
That's a great question. So instead, we're trying to tie people to the Oregon coast. So our job is to protect the entire Oregon coast from the northern border to the southern border of Oregon. And what I've learned, I'm still very new as an Oregonian. I started in this position last January, so it's been about a year now. And what I've learned so far is that people are very connected to the specific neighborhoods or specific communities on the coast where they live or where they vacation or where they have a second home. So trying to tie in our conservation messaging or our fundraising to those specific communities has been really helpful. So we have individual email lists targeted to specific zip codes or specific communities. We are trying to do more and more events targeted to specific communities so that people feel like we're not just lumping the entire coast together, but we're actually honoring the fact that there are differences up and down the Oregon coast. Just, a half-hour drive could be a totally different community with a completely different feel.
I guess that's true. I mean, there are cities on the coast, right? Like Portland, isn't Portland on the coast? Is that not on the coast?
It's not on the coast. It's about an hour and a half. There are some cities on the coast. There's Coos Bay and Newport, Astoria, Port Orford, but they're not cities the way New York City is a city. Much smaller cities.
Yeah. But you've still got like urbanized areas, and then you've, I'm sure, got deserted parts of the coastline as well that are just totally empty. Right?
Not much of the coast is really empty. There's a lot of rural areas, and then there's protected areas that are empty of people on purpose by design. But just like any coast, I think anywhere in the United States at this point, there's a lot of pressure to build and to develop so that there aren't deserted areas. Because even more rugged parts of the coastline are still really beautiful and have great property value. And what we're trying to argue is that the beach bill that in 1967 made Oregon beaches public property up to the vegetation line, we're trying to argue that that should still stand. And we're trying to protect the beaches not only for public access and the longevity of the beaches themselves, but also for conservation. Those beaches are habitat for so many birds and mammals and other species. They're habitat for vegetation. The beaches are also so important in the face of climate change with sea level rise and bigger storms and global warming and all of the things that we're facing right now. Without these coastlines and these beaches, all of our cities and towns would start flooding and would be susceptible to all of these climate change pressures. So it's actually important that some of the beach remains deserted, quote unquote, so that the beach can perform its natural function and not have mansions and riprap and golf courses and hotels and everything else that are getting in the way of these natural processes happening.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So every piece of the coast is kind of unique, and you found it sort of useful to use that in fundraising and messaging and targeting. Do you get, I would also imagine, this might be too much detail, but do you get sort of major donors in the same way that you would at the zoo? Like the Star Trek creator's wife, like, do you have, like, with that, is it more of a grassroots effort for you, or is it more like there are major donors who are interested?
We get major donors through foundations. So a lot of our funding comes from grants through foundations. And a lot of those foundations in Oregon have been set up by private people who have trust funds or family money or something like that. So in that sense, there are major donors in our funding pool. But the term major donor means something very different to me as an Oregon Shores representative now than it did to me as a San Diego Zoo representative.
Got you.
Very, very different tiers of funding. And that's not to say that there isn't the same type of money in Oregon. We're just a much smaller nonprofit, smaller in terms of staff, smaller in terms of capacity. So one of my goals as executive director is to get more private donor funding. But for now, the way that I'm classifying a major donor is anyone who gives $1,000 or more, as opposed to at the San Diego Zoo, a major donor was anyone who gave $1 million or more.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's going to depend on, It's going to depend on the audience and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Same ideas, just very different definition.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. So I do want to talk about Coastwatch because it's so fascinating to me. And I'll just say what I think it is, and I'll probably get it wrong, and then you can totally correct me. But this to me was amazing when we first met you guys, because my understanding, Oregon has how many miles of coastline? 200 and something, right? 280 miles, I think.
362.
Am I wrong? I should know this because I just did this. Anyway, 362. Yeah, at least I'm in the right, order of magnitude. So there's 360 some miles of Oregon coast. And what you guys have is a fleet of volunteers. I mean, you have an amazing group of volunteers who have all agreed to adopt 1 mile each of coast. And you have, and what they do is they commit to walking that mile of coast at least once a quarter and filling out a report on the website, including photos of how it's going on that mile, including things like, is there a crowd? Is there trash? Is there development? Like what's happening? What's the wildlife situation? And then you have, I know this because I had to migrate all of these silly things from Drupal into WordPress. You have more than 8,000 of these reports stretching back 20 years almost, about the condition of the coast at every mile, written in incredible detail by these people. Have I got that right? And if so, how did you get that going? Because it is amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And I know you're new, so how did it start? How have you continued it? How do you use it? I'm really fascinated by this.
Yeah, you were right. That's a perfect summary of the program. So Coastwatch is the first program in the nation where the citizens and community members of a state have adopted every single mile of the shoreline. And the goal of this program is so that we can see how the shoreline has changed over time with either natural induced changes or man-made changes. And this program was originally started by my predecessor, Philip Johnson. He pioneered this program in 1993. And then a few years ago, our Coast Watch programs manager, Jessie Jones, joined the team. And she's taken over the program since and really expanded and evolved the program. And the program now includes schools and community groups as well. So individual schools can adopt a mile of beach line and use that mile as a vehicle for outdoor learning and basically an outdoor classroom. So they can practice some science, technology, and math skills. They can practice close observations and things like that. So we have adults adopting miles, community groups like churches adopting miles, and we also have schools that adopt miles. And you're right, the program has been going since 1993. So our first versions of Coast Watch reports were all handwritten on paper and then mailed to us. And now, thanks to you, the Coast Watch reports are all online, and the volunteers can actually use a map tool that you built for us to see the reports and filter the reports by all of these different topics so they can find something specific if they're looking for something. And this year, because it's been 30 years since the Coast Watch Mile Report program started, we're actually hiring a contractor to do an analysis of the last 30 years to see if we have any trends or any data that's worth reporting to other organizations, to governmental agencies. Our reports, of course, weren't made using a scientific protocol, so we didn't control for any variables or anything like that. But we have this 30 years of anecdotal evidence about the Oregon coastline that no other organization has. So we're hoping that our analysis at least yields some sort of usable information or usable data, or it can at least correlate with some of the climate changes and natural induced changes that have been happening on the Oregon coastline, so that we can offer this data to researchers, and then hopefully that data will let us know how we should change our program and our form for the next 30 years. So we know what questions to ask and what questions are useful to researchers and what questions maybe aren't so useful.
That's fascinating. Why now? How do you get people? I mean, people are, I guess, passionate about the coast. Obviously, I grew up in California near the coast, and I love the coast and all that kind of stuff. But it's a commitment to do this. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not just, oh, hey, you can say you adopted a mile of coast. You actually are supposed to go there and walk that entire mile every quarter. How do you get, like, do people just kind of, do you advertise this program? Do you have to go out there and try and get people to do it? Or are people pretty much clamoring to do it and finding you? I mean, I'm just curious.
All of the above. So we've had people find us just sort of through the grapevine. But we also actively recruit people. So Jessie, our Coast Watch programs manager, definitely gives presentations and tries to actively recruit people to this program. Coast Watch now is very prominent on our website. It's prominent on all of our printed materials and our flyers. Whenever we table at an event, we're talking about Coast Watch and asking people to sign up. Some volunteers are very dedicated and report the 4 times a year, the once a quarter on their mile. Some report even more, which is great. Some volunteers we have to chase down a little bit to report on their mile. But I think the benefit of Coast Watch is that you can pick your mile, and there's no maximum number of people that can adopt a mile. So one of the most popular miles in Oregon is on Cannon Beach, right near Haystack Rock. It's a very touristy spot. There's a great town right there. It's a very accessible beach, nice and wide and flat and easy to walk on. So we have lots of people who've adopted that mile, and there's no financial commitment. So as many people can adopt as want to. There's some other miles that aren't even accessible by foot. We have a couple of miles of the Oregon coastline that you can only get to if you're kayaking or if you're in a boat.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's a cliff or there's, an estuary right there. Or there's no road to get there. So we do have a couple of very intrepid volunteers who've adopted those sort of boat access only miles and try to get
Amazing.
out there as frequently as they can to report. But obviously, if there's really bad weather, they can't get out
Mm-hmm.
there. So I would say the average is that we're trying to get everybody to report once a quarter or once a season, but it doesn't always
Mm.
happen. But that
Sure.
doesn't
Yeah.
disqualify you from being a ghost watcher. It's a very DIY program, so some people are not as involved. Maybe their lives are busier. They just don't have time that season. Maybe they're traveling. But then there's other people who not only adopt a mile, but work with Jesse to participate in one of 7 different community science projects that we offer. So they actually
Mm-hmm.
collect data for a researcher that Oregon Shores has partnered with. So we do things like collect data on sea stars for sea star wasting syndrome project, or
Mm-hmm.
map marine debris that's washing up on the beach for a marine debris mapping project. So there are
Mm-hmm.
some volunteers who adopting a mile and walking their mile at the beach isn't enough. They want to do even more. So then they work with us to participate in one of these community science projects.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And it's funny because it's such a good way of getting people. I mean, your mission obviously is to protect the Oregon coast. One of the great ways of getting people involved is to ask them to help you. And once they do, it sort of gets them even more involved. You know what I mean? Like I think a lot of people are afraid of asking people to help in some physical way
Mhm.
because they don't want to exhaust people or they don't want to turn people off. But man, I sometimes find that programs like this take low level volunteers or whatever and get them even more involved, right? Like once you've given some of your time and effort to something, you're sort of even more invested in the outcome. I don't know. It seems like such a good way of doing that.
I definitely agree. I mean, we have a coast watcher right now who's been a coast watcher for years and has been so involved with Oregon Shores. Um, and like you said, she wanted to become even more involved, and she's now a board member because she got
Yeah.
really passionate about this organization. And I think allowing people or enabling people to take action and to do something in their own lives helps combat that climate change fatigue, where climate change just
Mhm.
sounds so inundating and intimidating and just overwhelming. But by enabling people to actually get out there and roll up their sleeves and make a difference and show them what they can do to help or to make an impact in their own lives, I think really inspires people and helps them to feel like climate change is maybe a more manageable problem.
Totally. Yeah. I think there is, I mean, there was a big article in the New York Times about compassion fatigue, not
Mhm.
compassion fatigue. That's the wrong word, but, yeah, fatigue with issues fatigue, just
Yeah.
so much bad news coming down the pipe. I mean, constant bad news about things. It can get really, really tough, but I love that. I love that this program kind of, yeah, they are helping you, but they're sort of also, it's a good way of allowing people to feel like they're, that maybe there's something they can do. And, yeah, it's such like a kind of a great feedback loop. I love that.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly. They're helping us, but they're helping their communities and themselves as well. So
yeah, it's perfect. I really love it. Did you know about the program before you took the job as the exec director, or is this like,
I did, but just a very surface level look at it. I wasn't a Coast Watch Mile adopter myself before
well,
becoming
you
the
didn't live in
executive
Oregon,
director. I
right?
didn't
Like you
live
were in
in Oregon
town.
for very long before this position. So I definitely didn't have like a favorite mile of beach that I wanted to adopt before starting this position. So I knew about the program, but I didn't know how great this program actually is until I became the executive director.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good. I'm really glad we talked about that because I just think this program's amazing. And like people should really be copying this. It's such a good way of engaging people and accomplishing the mission at the same time. It's just like such a great program. People should be copying it, I think. So now they will, hopefully, with whatever their particular thing is. Before we get into like, I also want to obviously talk about website project because that's a huge, people get really anxious about doing website projects and want to know how it's going to go and pros and cons, great things and terrible things and all that kind of stuff. But before we do that, I kind of also want to just talk about really quickly you moving from the zoo to Oregon Shores. You become the executive director. You have Coast Watch and you have other programs. Anything, but I imagine being doing being the executive director of a nonprofit is a bit different from what you're doing before in the zoo environment. Some differences we talked about already. Any other sort of big surprises that hit you when you moved? Anything that was like either a great success that you were surprised by, or something that was much more difficult than you expected? Moving jobs and sort of becoming more of that manager of a nonprofit versus in a division of a zoo.
That's a great question. I think the things that were the most striking for me were the size of the nonprofit. San Diego Zoo is this bureaucratic behemoth of an organization. It's still a nonprofit,
sure.
but there are so many levels of management and middle management. Structurally, it's more like a corporation than a nonprofit.
That makes sense.
So coming to Oregon Shores, which is a much smaller nonprofit, and being executive director for the first time instead of just a team leader, it was surprising to me in the beginning that other than the board, there's nobody above me. There's no levels of bureaucracy, which seems obvious, but it was still surprising. So that took some getting used to.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah. The size of the organization took a little bit of getting used to as well. Like at the San Diego Zoo, because it's so large, there was somebody to do every tiny facet of a job. And here I would ask the board, okay, well, who does this? And they'd say, you do that.
You
okay,
do.
Well, who does this? You do that. Like, oh, okay.
That's you also. That is also you.
That's all me. Okay. So I think what I'm learning at Oregon Shores is that every staff person does the work of about 6 people. So that's very different compared to the San Diego Zoo. I think the other really big difference is all of the conservation and fundraising principles are exactly the same, but I had entirely new environments to learn about. I was an expert on African elephants and Sumatran tigers. I could tell a donor everything there was to know about a tiger. And now coming into this space, I've had to learn about estuaries and about marine environments and about shoreline habitats. And I'm still learning. There's so much that I still don't know. So it's been a fun challenge learning a brand new set of environments.
Yeah, totally. It's funny that you say that most of the fundraising principles and stuff are the same. Even though now you have to do all of them, or not all of them, but a lot of them. But you're still. So you're saying this? You're still doing email lists, and you're still doing events, and you're still doing sort of general, like the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, meeting with donors, hosting events. We're pursuing business sponsorships now. So all of those ideas are still the same, but instead of having an entire development department, it's me. I'm it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's a little bit different.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Okay, so I do want to transition to talk about website, because obviously that's near and dear to people's heart. So can you talk a little bit about, you guys just redid your website. I know that because we helped you do it. But I want to kind of get into like the entire process, like how it was for you as the client, as the person as the organization, right? Like what were the stressors? What were the good points? What were the bad points? And to start, really, what made you realize you needed to redo it in the first place?
That's a great question. So I was hired in December. I started last January, so 2023. The decision was made to redo the website before I came on board, which is great because I agree. The website really needed redoing. And it needed redoing because there was a lot of information on the website, a lot of really great information, but it wasn't very user-friendly. Somebody reading our old website really needed to want to dive into the nitty-gritty and understand all of the ins and outs of a specific case or a specific issue in order to digest what was on our website. It was sort of a barrier to new people joining or new people learning about an issue because the amount of information was just intimidating. It also wasn't very aesthetically pleasing. There was a lot of text, not a lot of like pictures or videos and things like that. And in this age of shorter attention spans and lots of, great online content, it's hard to keep people's attention with pages and pages of text.
Plus the fact that you guys have incredible photos
yes.
of the Oregon shore, which are amazing and should be a major part of what you're doing.
Yeah,
go on.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you. Go on.
Oh, no, not at all. Our Coast Watch Mile reports also weren't searchable. Once the reports were published and on the website, you could scroll back through years and years of reports, but you couldn't search for a specific topic. So you couldn't find like every report that had a stranded whale on it, for example. You would have to read through 30 years of reports to find the ones with the stranded whales. So that was kind of a barrier to using those reports. And then our old website was on a Drupal platform, which is, it was basically like expiring, I guess is the word for it. Like it was not going to be updated very well. And it was really difficult for the team to make any updates ourselves. We had to use our web maintenance team and our web developers to put even the smallest change on the website. And that was kind of a barrier to keeping the website fresh and new and up with the times. So we knew we needed to update the website. When I started, there was already funding for a new website. Well, most of the funding for a new website. But I needed to work with the team to help write the RFP, the request for proposals, and then send it out to everyone. So I really started on the ground floor, other than some of the fundraising and the decision to redo the website. Those predated me.
Got you. Did you hire a contractor to help you with the RFP process?
Jonathan is our external contractor, but he was helping us with so many other Oregon Shores related things. He helps with hiring me, and then he's been helping with coaching me and helping with fundraising and all sorts of other things. So helping me with the RFP was one of the things in his scope of work, but we didn't hire him specifically to do that.
Shout out to Jonathan, by the way. One of the things we can do on the podcast is like shout out people. Jonathan Poisner, I think, is that how you pronounce his last name?
Poisner.
Jonathan Poisner. Okay, let's cut that too. Jonathan Poisner. Shout out to Jonathan. He knew what he was doing. I mean, and when we came on the project, he was clear. He was like your sort of, he had been through the process before. He had done website projects before. He knew what to expect. He knew what to ask. Yeah, he was good. So good job with that.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan has been invaluable. And the other person we had helping with the RFP was a previous contractor who is also a volunteer for Oregon Shores. His name is Michael Coe.
Oh, Michael. I remember Michael too. Shout out to Michael also. Yes, for sure.
He was the person who worked with the developers of our previous website to implement that website. And he was sort of our IT guru who communicated with the developers every time we needed a change on the site. So he knew a lot of the ins and outs of our current site and helped with the RFP as well. We went through many versions of our RFP, and the one we ended up sending out was actually drastically simplified from the original version because of me, because I am not a very technological person.
Oh, come on. You could fool us. You know what's
I could do basic things, but I don't know like the back end of how to build a website. So a lot of the technical lingo that was in our RFP originally, thanks to Michael and Jonathan, who do know a lot more of the technical end. I actually worked with our then communications coordinator, Katie Russell, and we stripped a lot of that out and just said, we want these things from a website and left it up to the developers to pitch us on how they would implement those things on the site rather than spelling out what we were expecting. I don't know enough about websites to tell a developer, this is what I want from you. I just know what I want it to look like and how I want it to be used. So our RFP ended up being, it was like 2 or 3 pages, I think, instead of the 20 pages that it was originally.
Sure.
So we left it up to the developers like you guys to tell us how we could best do these different features on the site. And then we ended up interviewing, I think, 6 different developers. And we actually did 2 rounds of interviews. And I think that was the hardest part for me. I had a whole spreadsheet with the rest of the team of which developers could offer which things and the prices and the color coding based on how much we liked each developer. And at a certain point, it was so technical. Like the spreadsheet was comparing, like this little thing is slightly different than this little thing on the platform. And I ended up choosing you guys at BFC Digital because I liked the samples of your work. All of your previous websites that you've designed and the work samples that you showed us were beautiful and amazing and looked like what I was hoping to have for Oregon Shores. And you were easy to talk to and easy to understand and to work with. And some of the developers, I felt like I couldn't follow anything they were saying. It was so far above my head. And I was thinking like, oh my gosh, if I have to meet with these people, twice a week for 6 months and I can't understand a word they're saying, how am I going to communicate like what we need and want out of this website?
Oh, that's so funny because I do think that you guys, that is a really good approach. I mean, I'm just saying that because those are the people that we vibe with, but I do feel like people sometimes focus on technical requirements or the technology behind what you're trying to do, right? But you're the nonprofit, like your audience, what your goals are, what your vibe is, and you need to be able to communicate those things to us. And you know what I mean? Like to be able to choose, when you're choosing a partner, to me, being able to communicate with them is like number one. Just being able to speak the same language, because we're coming into it from the agency side. We're coming into it with some experience doing nonprofit websites, but we don't know what you guys are all about, and right. You need to be able, that needs to somehow get from your brains into ours, right. and that's like a hard thing to do. We can read your mission statement, you know what I mean? But it's really like, there's a whole lot of communication that needs to happen. And for that to get from your brain to ours, that's what the entire process is about. That's what the wireframe process is about. That's what the design process is about. It's just communicating that, bringing that in. And so, yeah, if it's hard to talk to the people, or you don't enjoy it, or they want to do the communication in a written form and when you really want to talk, or vice versa, it can be really tricky. So anyway, but I think I think your idea of stripping out the technical stuff, focusing on the communications angle, focusing on that and past, what have they done in the past? Does it look like stuff we would like? That sounds smart to me.
Right.
So,
right.
Good job.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it sounds like it was the right choice. And it clearly worked out great. I mean, we're thrilled with our current website, and clearly we get along well if we're doing the podcast together. So it worked great. And that's not to say that any of the other developers wouldn't have worked great, but I think I chose correctly. So.
Well, if I say so, I'll say you chose correctly. No. We love working with you. It really was a great project for us too. It was just really, you guys are very great to work with, easy to get along with. We really vibed. I don't know. The end result was awesome. I'm really happy with how it worked out. So, did you get, so when you sent the RFP, how many proposals did you get that you had to wade through? Just curious.
The first time we sent it out, I think we only got 3 or 4 because we only sent it to a few specific developers. And then Jonathan and Michael helped us send it much more widely for a second distribution. We eventually cut it off. I think we got like 30 some odd proposals. And then Jonathan and Michael did the legwork since they had gone through this website development process before. They went through the legwork of reading every proposal and eliminating the ones that right off the bat were not worth interviewing, or, were way out of our price range, or were way below our price range, I think, because the developers didn't necessarily understand the scope of the project. So, the people that were bidding like $2,000 to do our entire website, their proposal got taken out because there's no possible way to do that. For what we were asking for.
Yeah, they're thinking something else.
Yeah, they're thinking
so did you?
They didn't understand.
One great, and sorry, I do need to. Gosh, this conversation has gone so fast. I'm just realizing what time it is. I want to ask one quick question though. There's a debate now about whether nonprofits should put the budget in the RFP or not. Did you guys, I can't remember if you guys did or not. I think you did not. I don't
think we did. Your proposal came in right at the top of our budget. It was actually slightly over our budget. Our initial budget was $40,000. And I ended up doing a little bit of extra fundraising to raise money to make up the difference.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
So we didn't put in the budget because we were actually hoping that a proposal would come in below. And we were worried that if a team saw what our budget is, they would budget for that amount and not for what the project would really take. But if we did this again, maybe it would be a smart idea to put the budget in the RFP so that companies knew whether or not this project was even feasible for them. So I'm still not sure.
I am too. I'm really on the fence about it. I mean, I know from the agency side, agencies want you to put the budget in because they don't want to waste time putting together something if it's not going to happen. But from the nonprofit side, I'm really on the fence about whether it's better for you or not, because like you said, what the budget comes in at in the proposals also tells you something about whether it's a good match. You know, like the $2,000 people, are not a good match. The $200,000 people, are not a good match, right. But if you say what the budget is, everyone's going to say that, and so I wonder if you're eliminating one of the decision points. I don't know. Anyway, maybe that's short-sighted. Anyway, there's a kind of a debate. I'm interested too. There's a debate right now on Progressive Exchange and other email lists about whether to do it or not to do it. So interesting, your feedback. Okay. Well, we have case, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say in this case, I feel like if we'd set our budget, you could have toned down your proposal and eliminated things to match our budget, but then we would have missed out on some great content. And we were actually able to fundraise that difference to meet you at your proposal amount. So I think it actually worked out well that we didn't say a budget.
I think it might have too. Yeah, I think that might have been the right approach in this case. Anyway, I found that really interesting. But okay, so as I said before, this is going really fast. Can you just tell me rapid fire any surprises? And I want to see one good surprise and one bad surprise. Something that didn't go as well during the project, something that surprised you with how difficult it was to execute, something that went wrong, or and then something that went well that was also a surprise. If there's nothing on either side, great. But if there are, interested to hear them.
Something that didn't go as expected would be the fact that a lot of the content from our old website had to be rewritten for our new website because it wasn't a one-to-one migration of pages. We redid our strategic plan at the exact same time that we were redoing this website. So the sort of point of view of the organization shifted a little bit. So there was a lot more staff time involved on our end, having to write content and dig up photos and find videos and actually create content to put in this beautiful website frame that you'd given us, more than I had expected. So that was tough, but we got through it. On the good end, we loved using Basecamp and communicating with you guys. And I can't even count how many times I emailed you or emailed Shayna and just said, help. I don't know what's happening, but this isn't working. Please solve this. We're panicking. And you all solved it within a day or within an hour sometimes. So the communication was just such a pleasant surprise. Everything went so smoothly and seamlessly with working with you guys as partners. It was wonderful.
All right, well, that's good to hear. The content thing makes total sense. Yeah, I think most people are surprised writing content's hard and takes a long time. It takes a long time. And as you're planning a new website, we're going through that strategic process and that wireframing process, and you think, actually, we do need a page about this other thing. Oh yeah, we do need to have a section on this audience that we help that we haven't really talked about. And then you're like, oh no, now I have to write that and write that and write that. Anyway, okay. Any last questions? First of all, where can people find more information about you and what you do?
OregonShores.org.
OregonShores.org. Okay, great. And any last questions I did not ask you? We should probably leave it to one because of what time it is. But any last question I did not ask you that I should have asked you? I can think of about 20 million and would have continued to ask them if we had more time. But any one important question I did not ask that I should have?
I don't think so. If anyone is interested in hiring you, they definitely should. BFC Digital was amazing. We highly recommend you guys. But I don't think there's anything that you didn't ask that you should have asked.
Well, I appreciate that. I was not fishing for a compliment when I asked that. but Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been super interesting and I'm sure super helpful for people. Go to OregonShores.org, find out more about this. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Ben. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Thrive podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.